Well, good morning. As we get started today, quick announcement. Next Sunday, I will not be here, and so Jamie Erskine will be bringing the word next week, so you do not want to miss that. I am sad that I will be, but I will be back in Kansas visiting family for Thanksgiving time and whatnot. So just wanted to give you that update. But we're going to be in Genesis 39 today, not 29, Genesis 39 today, verses 20 through 23. So if you'd like, you can turn there. But before we get into the text, I kind of want to share a little bit about some of my past experience in ministry. Many of you may know that for 4 years I was a youth pastor there in Rapid City before coming here. And before that, I was in Oklahoma, still in college. And what you may not know, some of you do, some of you may not, is that I was a youth pastor while I was in college down in Oklahoma to a small church. And in my first year there at that church, the place was called Copan. In my first year there, the pastor who had helped plant that church and had been pastoring there for about 8.5 years, towards the end of the school year, resigned as it came out that he was in an extramarital affair and was leaving his wife for this woman. And this happened about a month and a half before school had let out for the summer, both for their school and then also for college. And I had planned on doing an internship under him at this church. We'd had it arranged with the board, had it arranged with him, and I was going to be leading the youth group under him during that summer. And so this all came out, and at this point I had no idea what I was going to do. All my plans had been made for the summer. I'd already had another part-time job lined up, and I really didn't have much time to change. As like I said, it was about a month and a half before, and by that time, any place that's doing internships for students in ministry had already had them booked. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And about a week later, the church board approached me and asked me, like, "Hey, would you still stay throughout the summer? You'll be leading the youth group. It'll be on you. You'll be doing the youth camp. You'll be leading them throughout the summer. You'll be doing the events." And even then, they were also asking if I would help lead on Sundays as well. So I was like, "Oh boy, I'm a sophomore in college. What are you talking about?" And then a few days later, as this was a Wesleyan church, the district superintendent of that area called me and talked to me. And he asked me personally to stay. And now, one thing about me is that I have a hard time saying no. It's one of my flaws. And so I told the DS and I told the board that I would stay through the summer. I would still stick with the plans and do the best that I could. That's what I told them. What I didn't tell them is that I didn't want to. I'm somewhat ashamed to admit it now, but I didn't want to stay there anymore. I didn't. I was hurt by the situation that had happened, and specifically by that pastor. I was mad at what had happened, and I was very angry at him. And really, the reason I didn't want to stay is because I was scared. I was terrified. I had no idea really what to do. I'd had about a year of, call it ministry training, if you will, but a year of college under my belt, where most of those were gen ed classes. And so I was like, I don't think these students want to learn about math. I haven't taken any really ministry courses yet. And so I was terrified, and I knew I would have nobody really over me to help guide me, help me learn, help me understand, help me work through some of these things. And ultimately, I had no idea how to help these students in their own hurt and their own pain about what happened. I had no idea how to counsel them through what had happened to them with this pastor, because for them, many of them, this was the only pastor that they had ever known. And so to me, this was just a huge, hairy, ugly mess that I did not want to be a part of. But for some reason, I said I would stay. And I had no idea why. And then I felt stuck. I felt stuck because I didn't want to stay, but I had said that I would. And when I say I'm going to do something, I commit to it. I stay with it. If I have given my word, hey, yep, I will do this, I'm going to do it. And so I felt a little kind of imprisoned. I felt that I'd almost been forced into the situation that I didn't want to be a part of anymore. I felt stuck. How many of you have ever felt stuck before? All right. Maybe you felt stuck in your job. When you first started out, it was exciting, it was fun, you were doing the things that you wanted to do. It was like, oh, this is the dream. And then things slowly started to change. It was no longer what it used to be. You were no longer doing what you wanted to accomplish. But you keep going because it's a job and it provides for your needs, but you're like, I just feel stuck. Maybe you feel stuck in a relationship with a friend or a coworker or a family member. You know that this person is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or they're not living their life the way that they should, or maybe they're walking down this wrong path, and you want to say something, you want to do something about it, but you know that if you say something, you know that if you do something, it may hurt or even end that relationship. So you're kind of there, you're kind of being supportive when you can, you offer advice when they ask, but you just feel kind of stuck because you don't know what to do. You don't like what's happening, but at the same time, you don't want to end that relationship. You don't want to leave them, but you can't stand the choices and the things that are happening. Maybe you feel physically stuck. Many of us, we're getting older, no longer able to do the things that we used to do. You might have to rely on others to help you with things, to help you out. And it might be that you have an injury or a physical ailment that prevents you from doing what you want to do. And so you feel stuck. Maybe you feel stuck spiritually. You no longer feel that spiritual drive, that fire that you felt like you used to have. You feel like when you pray, it falls on deaf ears. When you go to the Word, you're just like, it doesn't seem to come alive like it should, like it did, and nothing's really popping out to me, and you find yourself in what we Christians like to call a dry spell. You know, here's the big idea I want us to see today, and it's this. In times of felt imprisonment, in times of struggle, of hardship and suffering, it's important to remember that God does not leave us. It's so easy in those moments when we walk through something difficult, when something happens, when we feel stuck in a situation, when we feel imprisoned by something, that we feel like God is not with us. However, what we need to know is that God does not leave us, no matter what we're going through. As I said, we're going to be in Genesis 39 today in verses 20 through 23, and we're going to be looking at a part of a guy named Joseph. We're going to be looking at part of his story. And for those of you that don't know, I'm dropping this kind of right in the middle of his story, but he is the second youngest son of Jacob, and Jacob being Jacob who wrestled with God, Jacob who is then called Israel. His sons made up the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Joseph, he has kind of a complicated history with his family. He is the firstborn of Jacob's second wife, Rachel, who was supposed to be barren, was told she would never have kids, and then there was Joseph. Joseph was seen almost as this miracle child from God, born to do something special, and as a result, Jacob gave Joseph kind of preferential treatment, treated him special over his 12 or his other 11 brothers, and even to the point that he gave him a coat of many colors. You know, there's the old film Joseph in the Technicolor coat. Well, this is that story where he gave him preferential treatment. He treated him specially. He almost appeared to value Joseph over his other brothers. And even more so, Joseph began to have dreams. And he knew these dreams were not from himself, that these were from God. And these dreams showed him being raised up above his brothers. He correlated, he said to his brothers, I had this dream, you were stars, and then the stars bowed before me. And he wasn't trying to be arrogant about it, but he was just saying, this was my dream. And so his brothers became jealous of him, to the point that they sold him into slavery, and then they covered it up by saying that he'd been killed. And so their father, Jacob, thought that Joseph was dead, yet they had sold him into slavery to Egypt. And so when he was in Egypt, he got bought by a guy named Potiphar, and Potiphar was a very high-ranking official in the Egyptian court. And God continued to be at work in Joseph's life despite all these things that had happened to him. And God blessed the work that Joseph did. And eventually he became the head slave of Potiphar, and he was essentially in charge of the entire household. That only the people that would be above Joseph were Potiphar and Potiphar's family. All the other slaves, all the other servants, they went to Joseph for answers, for direction, for what to do. He was in charge of just about everything. And because of this, Potiphar's household flourished. And Joseph became very, very trusted. Then something happens. Potiphar's wife begins to take notice of Joseph and is like, oh, he's a good-looking guy. And she begins to try to entice him and try and convince him, hey, come to bed with me. And Joseph refuses time and time again. He says, no, this is not right. No, I will not do this. And it comes to the point she becomes so angry that she attacks him and then blames him and says, he attacked me. He attacked me. He came and he did these things to me. He tried to take advantage of me. And so Potiphar throws Joseph into prison. And this is where we pick up Joseph's story in Genesis 39:20 through 23, where it says this. It says, Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, I don't know about you, but verse 20 gives me the impression that Joseph is kind of stuck. He's been put into a situation that he doesn't want to be in. And as far as he can tell, there is no way out. See, prisons at this time were used to hold not only convicted criminals, but also forced laborers and those who are awaiting trial. And many of the prisoners never made it to court. They never went to trial because the trials were held on the whim of the ruler. It could be weeks before he's like, yeah, let's have trial. Who's up next? And then it could be months after that before they go on to the next one. It was whenever they decided to have trial. And so he's there waiting. And if I were Joseph, I would be just a little bit mad because all that has happened to him so far hasn't been his choice. It wasn't Joseph's choice to be favored, for Jacob to favor him over his brothers. It wasn't Joseph's choice that he had those dreams. It wasn't Joseph's choice that he was put into slavery. And it definitely wasn't his choice to go to prison. None of these choices, none of these things that had happened had been his. He did have to deal with them. And every one of those events that transpired had been at the hands of others, and Joseph had to find his way through the mess that was given to him. And the last one landed him in prison. However, through Joseph's struggles, we see that the Lord was faithful. Even though all these things had been happening to Joseph, even though all these things that were miserable and wretched and not good, we see that the Lord was still faithful to Joseph. There in verse 21, we read, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. I wonder if Joseph had taken the time to notice that. I wonder if Joseph knew that he was still favored even though he was in prison. I wonder if he could still see God's favor and love despite all that he was going through and dealing with. I wonder if we can do that in our own lives. If we're going through something difficult, if we're going through something hard, if we're going through times that just you're like, this is horrible and I don't like this, can we still see the favor of God in our lives? Joshua 1:9, it says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. This was a promise given to Joshua as he was getting ready to conquer the promised land. Saying, don't have fear as you go into this. Don't be afraid as you come against these forces that are going to be bigger than you, that are going to be stronger than you. Because guess what? The Lord your God will be with you. What does it mean, though, when it says that God was with Joseph? And what does it mean in that same way that with Joshua? Let me tell you about the the first time that I preached. It was my senior year of high school. I was asked by some friends at a neighboring school if I would speak at an FCA event called Fields of Faith, which had here about a month ago. And at first I said no because they told me, like, oh, we're expecting 300 people. It was a fairly big school. And they're like, yeah, it'll be about 300 people. That's kind of what we're thinking. And I was like, no. Because at that time, I could barely get in front of my class of 15 students and give a presentation. And these were kids that I had grown up with, And so it's like, I know these kids, I know these people. I still couldn't give a presentation. And so I was like, no, there's no way. I'll have a nervous breakdown. There's no way I can do that. And so as the week went by, God made it very apparent that he wanted me to speak. And so after 3 very sleepless nights, I called my friend back and said, all right, here's the deal. I will speak. I will do that. And he's like, great. All you have to do is give your testimony. 2 other students are going to be doing it. You're not going to be by yourself. It'll be fine. So, okay. No big deal. But I was terrified. And even more so when I saw that there were more than 300 students there, I began to go in a slight freak-out mode. And so as I was waiting for my turn, it looked like I was sitting in the middle of an earthquake because I was literally shaking. Like, that's how bad it was. That's how nervous it was. I was sitting there shaking. I could not control it. But when it came time for me to speak, though, it felt something surround me. I stopped shaking. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I can tell you that God was not only with me, but his presence was made known to me in that moment. I'm sure some of you might have similar stories where you've experienced something like that, maybe not, but God doesn't always make his presence known in big ways like that. He did for me in that moment, but there have been other times where he hasn't. Sometimes, though, he does it in smaller ways. He does it in little ways, which we can very easily overlook if we're not paying attention. The truth is, though, God is with us whether we know it or not. Whether we see it in those big present moments or if it's in a small moment that we might overlook, God is with us. He's not only with us in the good times, but also in the bad, like in Joseph's situation. In those felt times of imprisonment, of struggle, of hardship, of suffering, God does not leave us. Instead, he is right there with us. He knows what we're going through, and he knows why we're going through it. God doesn't abandon us. God doesn't leave us, but he is faithfully there pouring out his love for us. Everything Joseph went through, God was with him. And the same goes for us. No matter what situation we are in, whether it be at work, whether it be in relationships or friendships, or if it's just plain life coming down on us, we can be sure that God will not leave us. And there are even times that God even blesses us amidst our struggles. Sometimes, though, it may not seem like a blessing at all. Sometimes we can't see the blessing that's in front of our eyes. Just like when things are going good, we may not recognize God's work because we're blinded by our own pride. In times of struggle and hardship, we sometimes miss or don't recognize God's blessing because of our narrow focus. We're so focused on the hardship, we're so focused on the trial, we're so focused on maybe the suffering that we are going through that we don't see the blessing that God has placed right in front of us. There in verse 22, we read, "So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there." Now, I'm just guessing, but I don't think Joseph dreamed of one day becoming the head prisoner in Pharaoh's jail. I don't think that was his goal. Like, yes, I'm the top prisoner. Yes, goal completed. I'm going to guess probably not. Actually, Joseph had completely different dreams in which he was a leader, just not one in prison. But how much of a blessing would that have been, though? To be recognized as the head prisoner, the one that was placed in charge of everything, the one that's responsible over everybody. Now, some of you are going, I don't want to be responsible over a bunch of people. That would not be great. That doesn't seem like a blessing. Yet, Joseph would have had added advantages. We're even told that the warden didn't really pay attention to much of what Joseph did because, well, Joseph was taking care of it, and it was being successful. So he didn't have a micromanager of a warden over the top of him. It means things were probably fairly laxed for him. There were rules and things that he had to do, but at the same time, he didn't have somebody over the top of him beating him. He didn't have somebody over the top of him pushing him down, saying, this is what you have to do, and do it now, do it this way, and do it my way. As the person that was in charge, he probably got better food, better water. He probably got a few extra privileges. We don't know how long it was before Joseph was recognized and placed in charge, but we know that at some point he was. He was no longer at the bottom, but he was at the top. Joseph was leading. He was the boss except for the warden. It was not only a blessing, which may or may not have been lost on Joseph since he was still in prison, but it was also experience that Joseph would need for in the near future. God also made Joseph successful. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Through God, Joseph was successful in what he did. Joseph was obviously a hard worker, and God amplified that work because Joseph trusted in God. Because of that, God made him succeed. It wasn't because of Joseph. It wasn't because of his own talent. It was because God was with him and showed him favor. And so it was through God that Joseph succeeded even in the midst of the hardship. Now you might be thinking, okay, what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with my situation or where I am at? How does this part of Joseph's story relate to me? Let me tell you this, and this is really the one point that I have for today, and it's this. Sometimes God allows us to be in situations where we feel powerless and stuck, only to bless us with his love and favor so we will succeed in the work God wants done. I know it's a long one, so I want you to leave it up there for a little bit, but God sometimes allows us to be in situations that are not fun, that are difficult, that are hard, that we may not understand. Situations where we feel powerless, where we feel completely stuck, only so that he can bless us, only so that he can make his love and his favor known to us so that we know that we will succeed not by our own merit, not by our own self, but because of him. God has a plan. Most of the time we don't know what that plan is. There are times when choices are made for us and decisions are taken out of our hands. We may feel as if we have no control over what is happening in our own life, or perhaps our job, the things that are going on. When that happens, it's easy to get discouraged, it's easy to get depressed, it's easy to just try and give up. It's easy to give up on the areas of your life where you seem to have no control, or at least move away from it and become hardened to those areas. In the book of James writes this. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." I don't know if Joseph considered it pure joy, but I do believe that he was tested, and all the events that occurred in his life helped him mature, helped him develop into the person that God needed him to be for what was coming in the future. And Joseph didn't just sit there in prison. He didn't sit there and mope. He didn't sit there and whine. He didn't sit there and go, woe is me. But he worked, and he worked hard. Soon, he was noticed by the jailkeeper, who made him in charge of all, and God blessed him in that time so that he would be prepared for what was about to come in his life. For what was coming was a situation that would put all of Egypt and all the area in peril. A famine was coming. God was preparing Joseph to lead during that time, because if you don't know the rest of the story, there are two gentlemen that became jailed. One was a baker for the Pharaoh, the other was the cupbearer. Joseph interpreted dreams for them. He told the cupbearer, when you go back into the Pharaoh's court, tell him about me. Remember me. Eventually he did. And when Pharaoh began having dreams and not understanding what was going on, and none of his magicians could tell him what they meant, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. So they brought Joseph out of prison, and Joseph told him the meaning of the dreams and then even instructed, this is what you are to do. And so Pharaoh granted Joseph power over all of Egypt. The only one higher than Joseph was Pharaoh himself. And in doing that, he eventually saved his own family from peril. But in that moment in prison, being accused of something he didn't do, I don't think Joseph saw much of anything as a blessing. Yet God was still working. God was preparing him for what was to come next. See, I'm scared to think of what would have happened had I not stayed there at Copan that summer and those next several years. Even though my hands felt tied and I didn't want to be there in that moment, I knew I had to keep going. I knew I had to stay with it. I had said yes, and so my stubborn part of me, yes, I am very stubborn, said, fine, I will stick through it and I will do it because I gave my word. Yet God was working in the midst of it. And I realized that many, many times throughout that summer that I would not have made it through had it not been for God. Because there were so many times that I was stretched beyond my limits. The events that had taken place at church had been painful. I was scared out of my wits, but God chose to bless the situation. What had been a difficult and challenging summer turned into one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And I'm so incredibly thankful for that church. I'm so incredibly thankful for that ministry. It helped reaffirm my call to ministry, but it also prepared me for struggles that I was going to have over the next 2 years there, and as well as several struggles I've had since in ministry. God used that moment, something that was out of my control. I mean, I did say yes to staying there, but everything else that had happened was not my decision, was not my choice, was not fun to walk through. Yet God decided and chose to work in the midst of it. I was given favor. I was blessed through it. And not just me, but those students there, those families that went to that church. What I really want you to get from this passage is whatever situation you're in, good or bad, God is preparing you. He's preparing you for something. Through his trials, God was proving to Joseph that he was with him and would remain with him. In the same way, God might be trying to tell you something. So if you're in a situation or you get into a situation where you feel stuck, where you're like, this is difficult and I don't know how I'm going to make it through this, ask yourself, God, what are you trying to tell me? God, what are you preparing me for? God, how are you going to work in this situation? Not for selfish reasons, but God, how are you going to work so that your name is known? God, how are you going to work so that people will hear your love? People will hear your truth. See, at the beginning of this message, I told you that Joseph really didn't have any control over what happened to him, and in many respects, he didn't. However, when many of those choices have been made for him, he still had a choice in the midst of it, to keep going or to give up. When he was thrown into slavery, he could have given up. He could have been a poor worker. He could have fought against it all, but he didn't. He kept going. If Joseph's father hadn't chosen him to be his favorite, his brothers wouldn't have resented him. If Joseph hadn't had those dreams, his family wouldn't have despised him, and his brothers wouldn't have sold him into slavery. If he hadn't been sold into slavery, Potiphar couldn't have bought him. If Potiphar couldn't have bought him, Potiphar's wife couldn't have tried to sleep with him. And if she hadn't tried to sleep with him, Joseph wouldn't have been put into prison. If he had been put into prison, Joseph couldn't have interpreted the dreams of those prisoners. And if he hadn't interpreted those dreams, Pharaoh never would have found out about him. And if Pharaoh had never found out about Joseph and how he could interpret dreams, Pharaoh's dreams never would have been interpreted. And so Egypt would have perished. And then with that, all of Israel. See, every one of those events led into another. But they all had to happen exactly the way they did. Otherwise, Joseph wouldn't have been able to save Egypt. He wouldn't have been able to save his family. And his family was the nation of Israel. And without the nation of Israel, well, we wouldn't be here today. God had a plan and was preparing Joseph. And if you feel stuck right now, maybe he's preparing you. Preparing you for an opportunity to be a light in a person's life, or a change that may be coming where you can make a difference. Perhaps God might be trying to tell you something. Maybe he's telling you to slow down. Maybe he's telling you to have patience. Maybe he's telling you to speak up when you should. Maybe he's telling you to examine yourself and where you're at. Joseph had a choice to trust in God and keep going, or to give up. In Joseph's case, and in many cases, God wants us to keep trusting and keep going. Sometimes that means that we have to give up, or rather, we have to give something up. Some of you might be feeling this right now. God allows us to be in those situations where we feel powerless, where we feel stuck, only to bless us with his love and favor so that we will succeed in the work that he wants done. Remember that, the work he wants done. But sometimes we're stuck because we have something in our life that's not letting us move forward, especially in our relationship with God. That something is sin. Now you might be here today and you have that spiritual dryness right now. And that could be because you're holding on to something. Or it could be because you've never truly felt free from sin at all. And I can tell you that can end right now, because Jesus died on the cross bearing our sins so that we could be free from them. His blood was shed so that we could walk in true and right relationship with God in holiness. All we have to do is let go of what is holding us back and give it all to Christ. I love the story of Joseph, and I really like the animated movie that was done a number of years ago, Joseph, the King of Dreams. How many of you have ever seen it? A number of you. It's a good movie. And though it doesn't stick strictly to Scripture, it is an animated movie after all. There's a scene in this movie where Joseph is in prison. And there's this little twig that's kind of growing in the cracks. And there's a couple of prisoners in there. They're give it a little bit of their water ration. They're trying to get it to grow. And really not much is happening. And those prisoners get taken away. They're the two that Joseph interprets the dreams for. And he's getting mad and angry and yelling at God, and he's trying to climb to the hole that's up at the top, and he falls, and it breaks the twig. And he wakes up after being knocked out, and he realized what's happened, and he realized this thing has been kind of destroyed, so he props it back up, and he begins to take dirt and put dirt around it. And then he begins to take stones, and he begins to build a base around it to help protect it. And then as he sets each stone, there's like this memory that happens with each one. Some of it's the memories of his dad giving him a coat of many colors. Another one, it's a memory of his brothers laughing at him and making fun of him. Another memory, it's his brothers selling him into slavery. And it's all these memories that are kind of associated with bad things that have built up and led to this point. The memories that have led him and these situations that have led him to this point. And it's almost each one is this memory, and he's letting it go. He's dropping it. Almost like this isn't going to carry, I'm not going to carry this anymore. Drops it. I'm not going to carry this memory anymore. Drops it. I'm not going to carry this memory anymore. Drops it. Those decisions don't define me. Those situations don't define me. Those sins don't define me. We have to do the same thing. We have to realize that we are forgiven when we go to Christ, and we need to let go of the sins that we might be holding on to. We need to let go of the shame that we might be holding on to because of a situation that happened to us or a situation that we have caused. We need to let go what is holding us back, give it all to Christ, and walk in the newness that we have through Him. Remember, God sometimes allows us to be in situations where we feel powerless and stuck, only to bless us with His love and favor so that we will succeed in the work that He wants done. If we're going to do the work that God calls us to do, we need to live our lives the way that God calls us to live. And that's not in sin. That's not holding on to who we were before Christ. It's holding on to Christ now. So as you leave here today, I want you to think about what is God trying to tell you and what he might be preparing for you. You pray with me. Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for this morning. And Father, I pray for all of us right now who might be feeling stuck, feel like we're in a situation where we are powerless, where there doesn't seem to be much hope, a situation where we feel like our hands are tied and we don't know what to do. And Father, I pray that you work in them. You work in our situations and you work in our hearts, Father. And Father, may they be used as a time to prepare us for the things that you have called us to do, to prepare us for a person we might need to step into their life with, God, to prepare us for a time where you want us to work and do your work, Father. God, help us to see your favor in those situations. Help us to see your blessings in those situations. And help us to lean on you during that time. Father, I pray for those right now who might be holding on to something that need to let go, that need to drop that sin, that need to drop that shame, that need to let go of its weight and cling to you, Father. Father, work and move in our lives. Prepare us for what you have called us to do. Help us to be like Joseph, to keep trusting and keep going and not give up. Father, I pray this in your holy and precious name. Amen.
All right, stand if you're able, and we will